Thanks for having me.
How's it going, Matt?
Thanks for being here. Tim, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
All right, my name's Tim. Right now I live in the Antelope Valley, and from Chatsworth, and pretty much just spend the days working and coming home at night. Nothing too interesting.
When things get interesting, that's when the problems start, so that's a good thing. Matt, how about you? Please give us a brief bio on yourself.
My name's Matt. Born and raised in a small community just outside of Lancaster, California, called Lake Elizabeth. But it's all one. There's a certain area. It's called the Antelope Valley, like Tim said, and it's pretty much the cities of Palmdale, Lancaster, Lake Elizabeth, Lake LA, and Quartz Hill, California. We're about 45 minutes north of LA. I used to be a English teacher. Now I'm a substitute teacher as well as an engineer for a large casino up in Central California. Not central, kind of north of San Francisco. I was a geology major for a long time. I switched over to English. I know it's a kind of a hefty leap, but yeah, like I said, like Tim said, actually, not very interesting. I mean, I've been through some stuff, but none of them extremely paranormal. Not in the situation we're going to talk about that happened with Tim.
How did you two meet, by the way?
High school buddies. Tim and I lost touch for about, I'm going to say 16 years or so, maybe like 14 years. And, thanks to the magic of the internet and social media, we reconnected. We picked up our friendship right where it left off. And, we've been, speaking at least 3 or 4 times a week, since then. Even after, we both moved to separate locations.
Yeah, it's pretty funny how things in life work out, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say it is. Tim, before you had your encounter, what were your feelings on the existence of Sasquatch?
Not really anything in particular. I mean, I didn't write it off, but it wasn't really something that I thought about very often. As a matter of fact, I think the main thing that gave me any information, probably all horrible information, about Sasquatch was the movie Harry and the Hendersons. So that's about where my Sasquatch knowledge was. But again, it's not necessarily something I would have just written off, because, I know it's a big world and, can't really know everything in it, even though we'd like to think so. But again, it's not really something that was on my mind very often.
Oh, no, I can understand that. Matt, before Tim told you about his encounter, what were your thoughts on the matter?
I've had I wouldn't call it obsession, but a very, sure, we'll call it obsession with Sasquatch from an early age. It wasn't Harry and the Hendersons, actually. If memory serves me correctly, I was very young, and there was a reboot in the 80s of The Twilight Zone. And I want to say it was this series, but there was an episode where a Sasquatch followed a woman home and became like her guard dog. There was a scene where it was hiding in the closet when she came home from work, and then it leapt on her, but it started licking her like a puppy. But I guess just the makeup effects or whatever at the time terrified me. And then I guess to kind of put a balm on that psychological wound, my folks took me to go see Harry and the Henderson theaters, and it was like the big friendly Sasquatch. And I kind of put it out of sight and mind for a while, and I got into Sasquatch again recently, like in the last 7 years or so, when a good friend of mine was working at a hunting lodge up in Oregon. I want to say it's outside of Medford, but I could be completely wrong. But it's a very, very isolated place. I think you actually have to take a helicopter in there if you're going to be staying there. And this guy, as well as Tim, I've known for decades. And he called me up one day. He says, yeah, so I threw my cell phone at a Sasquatch. Obviously, he wasn't calling from his cell phone at the time, but he was, I guess, out on a night hike. And he's a pretty avid hunter. He knows the wild animals out there. He knows a cougar from a wolf, from all that fun stuff. And he said that he came across a group of 3 bipedal humanoids chattering back and forth, and what he guesses is the alpha charged him. So he was only out for a nature hike. He had no firearms, so he hucked his cell phone at the thing and ran away. But I guess that people at the lodge, they heard the knocking, the infamous tree knocks. Somebody was snooping around by the trash and came back in and said, hey, Jeff, one of his coworkers was like this big burly man. Like, Jeff, I thought you quit smoking. What the hell were you doing out by the dumpsters? And Jeff's like, dude, I've been here this entire time. Oh, there's a big thing out there about the dumpster. Oh, crud. You know? So he told me about that. I'm just like, wow, that's kind of terrifying because, you know, I always make jokes about wanting to go on a Sasquatch hunt, but, you know, expedition. And said, I didn't say his name, but I don't think he cares. But, he goes, yeah, the funny thing about Sasquatch is everyone thinks they want to find one until they do. Yeah. And he says, you know, that's coming from firsthand. So he's like, keep them in your imagination. You're better off not running into a Sasquatch.
Did he ever wind up getting that cell phone back?
We never came up with conversation again. And personally, if I was him, I probably would stay away from the area where he threw it.
Yeah, I'd say so. Just think there's a Sasquatch out there somewhere running up his minutes.
As a joke, because at first I didn't know how to take it, as a joke, I actually texted his cell phone and said, Mr. Sasquatch, can you give my friend his phone back? So there might be a confused Sasquatch out there with a beeping phone with a text message on it.
Yeah, you never know. Just might happen. Matt, why did you reach out to me and let me know about Tim's experience?
Well, a couple of years ago, Tim and I were coming back from a long day we spent up in Ridgecrest with some LARPing buddies of ours, live action role playing. We were driving down, I forget the name of the road. Tim, what's the name of the main thoroughfare between the AV, the one that goes to Red Rock Canyon, Ridgecrest, all that fun stuff? Do you know the name of that road?
Not offhand.
Yeah, I want to say the 50th, but I could be completely wrong.
Yeah, I think it's 50. So, but it's a long stretch of nothing, especially at night.
But the funny thing is, there was I don't mean to talk too much here, but there's a little bit of background involved with the conversation. Back in like 2005, 2006, a buddy of mine were very interested in the show Taps, you know, the Ghost Hunter show. We had actually been driving up that road to drop another friend of mine off to pick up his vehicle from this like podunk hotel, and we saw something weird in one of the outbuildings. So almost a year later, we went back, did a whole like amateur hour paranormal investigation of that area. Anyways, as we were passing this particular area on the way back from Ridgecrest, this is fast forwarding to me being with Tim, I was like, oh yeah, so that's where I did this thing. And we were like kind of just starting to swap spooky stories. Tim has this he kind of thinks himself as like a ghost mace or, you know, ghost pepper spray. He says whenever he's around haunted areas that people swear up and down are haunted, nothing happens. So he was making light of that. And then he told me something that kind of blew me away. I wasn't like, you know, stop the car, you know, but it was just like, that's weird.
Well, luckily I was driving, so I wouldn't have stopped the car anyway.
Yes. But, you know, we were swapping these spooky stories, and Tim just very nonchalantly, just like, you know, me giving you the weather report, was like, yeah, when I was a little kid in Chatsworth, I saw a werewolf. And I was, you know, he explained it, and I was like, well, if it was anybody else, I would probably just dismiss this. Then fast forward once again till about, maybe a month and a half, 2 months ago, I was listening to an episode of Coast to Coast AM on YouTube. Nori had the Bigfoot Outlaws, you know, Akumbo and Bear as guest stars. I thought they were very entertaining. And it was funny because they have lingo, like they call the Sasquatches boogers. So they have nicknames for these creatures. They see them so often, they actually have like, you know, there's regional dialects, you know. So I was actually listening to their shows on a bus trip, and their episode where you were a guest star talking about Dogman came on. And just what you were talking about, I'm like, you know, I've got to get to my buddy Tim on this because this sounds eerily familiar to what he described to me, you know, 2 years ago. So after I got back to my new house and sort of settled, I subscribed to your channel on YouTube, and I saw your, you know, if you have questions about such and such, you know, go to the webpage. And that's where I submitted my story on behalf of Tim.
Well, I'm so glad you did. I can only imagine the look in your face when Tim told you that story about what he had seen. Speaking of which, Tim, let's get into that encounter now. Please give us every last detail that comes to mind.
Okay. Well, obviously this was quite a while ago. I mean, over 20 years ago. We were living in Chatsworth, and I can't remember my age exactly, but I know it's somewhere between about 9 and 12, that area. At the time, me and my brothers, we all shared a room. We had bunk beds, and my bunk bed happened to be close to this. It was a small window, kind of like at the top of the wall. It was kind of a weird place for a window because you could really only see out of it if you were at the top of the bunk bed, which is where I always slept. And that window looked out into kind of a weird area. There was a space between the house where I was living and our neighbor's house. And there's not really anything in that area. It was just kind of a useless area. There's just our house, their house, and the wall kind of between it. So it was just like I'd say about like a 10-yard space. So I was actually asleep at the time. It had been, I don't know what the heck happened that day. I don't really remember. There wasn't really any interesting details about the day. I just remember waking up, and it was really, really late at night. As I checked, and my brothers were both asleep, and they were in the room with me still. So I'm like, okay, it's not morning. It's not time to get up. So I just kind of, looked around the room. So I figure if it's not time to get up, I can go back to sleep. But I was kind of wondering why I woke up. So I turned my head to look out that window I was telling you about. And outside that window, I saw, at first glance, it looked like a dog. Not like any dog I've ever seen, but then kind of taking into account where the heck I was, I realized there's no way in heck it could be a dog because it was at least 6 or 7 feet off the ground from where I was looking. Because I was looking out that window and the head of it was level with me. So once my brain made that connection, that's when I started to get scared. And that's also when I noticed the eyes. They weren't like I've seen things with red eyes in movies, but it's like kind of an unbelievable glow, if you know what I mean. But this was like, it's almost like kind of how you see cat eyes in the dark, but the wrong color. Like it was more of like a reddish color. And I remember seeing that, and that scared me to death. So I looked for a fairly good while, although I guess it's hard to judge time when you're scared to death. But it seemed to be kind of like moving its head as it was walking around in that area. And so when its head kind of started turning in my direction is when I kind of closed the blind and turned over and, pretty much started praying.
Yeah, when you look out the window and see something like that, I can definitely understand you praying the way you did. That had to be quite the sight to see.
Yeah.
When you woke up, did you experience any funny feelings before you actually knew there was a dogman outside?
I remember kind of feeling apprehensive. If I had just kind of woke up and thought nothing of it, I would have just rolled over and went back to sleep. But I remember feeling, apprehensive was the right word, because the first thing I did when I did wake up was look around and make sure my brothers were there with me.
The moment you looked out the window and saw the dogman there, did you try to get your brother's attention, or did you stay silent?
Oh, no. I definitely stayed silent. When I saw it, like I said, the first split second was, oh, look, a big dog. But that was a very, very brief thought, because when I started actually looking at it, I stayed silent. The last thing I wanted was to make any kind of sound that would direct its attention towards me.
Now, I can understand that. You described its head looking as if it was about 6, maybe 7 feet off the ground. If you were to go outside and measure from the ground up to the windowsill, how high do you think it would have been?
I'd say at least 7 or 8 feet if I were to go out there and measure up to that window.
That's pretty high. When you first saw that dogman, how close was it to that window?
It seemed to be in about the middle of that area between the houses. So I'd say it was probably about 5 feet away from my window, maybe a little bit more. Like, it wasn't, thankfully, it wasn't right up against the window, but it was close enough where I, was able to get a fairly good view.
What were the lighting conditions like out there?
If I were to guess, I'd say it was probably about 2 or 3 in the morning. It was pretty dark. We had a street lamp in front of our house, but because of the way the roofs, the 2 houses kind of went over the houses, it didn't give it very much light there. So it was pretty dark. It was a pretty dark night. Like, it was dark enough that I couldn't make out any kind of color on the thing.
Yeah, that time of night, unless you do have a light overhead, it is going to be hard to make out much detail. But when you first looked out that window and saw it, were you able to determine what it was doing at the time?
As far as I can tell, it was just going through that area. It looked like it was just moving in the direction towards a wall. The wall that it was heading to went directly into my backyard. And then from my backyard, Chatsworth is I'm not going to say like an urban area. It's more of a suburban area, but there is parks and mountains, and there's areas where people raise horses and stuff like that. So it's not like completely, it's not like a city, I guess is what I'm saying. So it looked like it was heading back out. I mean, at the time I just knew it was going towards the backyard, but it looked like it was probably going towards the mountains that were out behind my house.
You said the mountains were behind your house, but were you right on the edge of your suburbs where something could walk straight into your backyard out of the trees, or did you have a buffer of other properties?
No, we were, where my street was, we had a block went around and there was a bunch of houses behind us, and I'd say there'd be several streets that you'd have to go through before animals would be able to come down from the mountain there. I mean, it was an area where if you looked out from my backyard, you could see the mountains fairly close, but they'd have to go through a little bit more of a suburban area to get there.
Well, this is proof again that you don't have to be right on the edge of town to have a dogman encounter. Even during the daytime, they do seem to come into areas like that. Why they do, I just don't know. Matt, as you're sitting there and Tim's telling you his story, did you ever for one moment doubt his story?
No. I've known this guy upwards of 20 years, and Tim's always been the straight one of the group. What I mean by that is, I don't think Tim's touched a drop of liquor in his life due to his faith. He's not one to exaggerate. He doesn't have a reputation in any circles for wild storytelling. And I just know that, if Tim wanted to impress me, there's other ways he could have gone about doing it besides saying he saw a werewolf in the backyard. So I never doubted for a second the story. I had my I knew Tim saw what he saw, and then I tried maybe to, in my own head, rationalize what he saw. But the first thing Tim said after the initial shock was, it wasn't a person in a suit. There's no way, because he saw, he was telling me he saw very, the way the thing was built. You have to have, if it was something in a suit, it would have been a monkey in a suit, because the front arms were long. The thing had huge, broad shoulders, and almost like satyr, look at a dog's leg. They look like they're knees on backwards.
When I was looking at it, because I think most people, even when you're a little kid and when you're probably more susceptible for flights of fancy, but you kind of want to look at it and explain it so that it's not scary anymore. So that's the first thing I did, was I looked at it, and even though it was too dark to see color, I could see the shape. And like I was telling Matt, there's no way it could have possibly been a guy in the suit. The only thing that I could think of close to describing it would be a werewolf. And until actually Matt brought your show to my attention, that's always how I described it, because that's the only point of reference I had.
What else are you going to think? No, that does make good sense. After you opened up to Matt about that experience, how many people have you told about it?
Well, there was one other person in the car with us when I was telling Matt the story, but I don't think they were listening, so I don't know if they'll count, but sure, we'll count them. And one other friend of mine who was, again, just kind of tangentially around while me and Matt were discussing this. So, probably about 4, and now you make 5.
Why'd you wait 20 years to tell anyone about it?
Well, for the first part, as far as I knew at the time, I was the only person who ever saw something like that. And also at the time, being a kid, I just figured if I went around telling people I saw a werewolf, they'd probably just think I was a nut. So, I mean, there was a little while afterwards where I was kind of afraid of seeing it again. But when that didn't happen, then I remembered it, but it's just not really something I talked about. I kind of wrote it off as a one-time thing that I really wouldn't have to worry about again, and thankfully, that's so far proven to be the case.
I can understand your reasoning on that, but at times, do you find yourself regretting the fact that you did keep it inside for so long?
Not especially, just because so far it seems to have worked out. I mean, I have a fairly good reputation as being trustworthy and all that, but it seems like it doesn't matter how trustworthy you are. If you tell someone, hey man, saw a werewolf, then their first instinct will probably be to not necessarily have an open mind like Matt did, but look at you a bit askew.
That is a good point. For you to be able to see what color its eyes were, it had to be facing you at least to a certain degree. But at any time while you're watching this thing out your window, did it ever do anything to make you think that it definitely knew you were watching it?
Well, when I first started watching it, as it was walking, like I said, it seemed to be looking straight ahead, but at the same time, it seemed to be like turning its head back and forth as it was going. Because it seemed like it was going somewhere kind of with a purpose, but it wasn't in any particular hurry. Although, I mean, from what I could see, it definitely looked like if it wanted to move in a hurry, it could move really fast. So it just seemed like it was going somewhere, but at a leisurely pace. But like I said, it was moving its head as it was going. And it started, when its head was swinging back my way, that's when I was able to see its eyes. When I saw the eyes was pretty much when I decided I was done looking.
Oh, I can understand that. You talked about how it was moving its head side to side, back and forth. How would you describe its movements?
It seemed very natural. If it had been very jerky, then I probably would have just think, no, okay, it's some crazy person in a suit. But it definitely seemed very fluid.
Some eyewitnesses say the dogmen they saw were kind of jerky in their movements, but other eyewitnesses, they say what you just said, that the dogman seemed to be pretty fluid and smooth in its movements. So I guess you never really know from encounter to encounter how they're going to move or react.
I haven't really listened to too many encounters, because, I mean, I listened to a little bit of one when Matt first told me about your show, but I haven't really listened to much since then, because once I knew I was going to be talking to you about it, I didn't want to listen to other people's experiences too much, because I didn't want to start thinking I remembered things I didn't remember. But it seemed to be sort of, I guess, relaxed in its movements. Like I said, it was going somewhere. It wasn't going particularly fast. So that's maybe the only thing I can think of that could possibly explain the difference. But I don't know. You're the expert.
Oh, there are no experts on them. Just people who know a thing or two about them, but definitely aren't experts. In the report that you submitted to me, you said that it had freakishly long arms. Please tell us more about that.
Well, because I was at pretty much eye level with the thing, I saw its head, I saw its upper body and torso, and its arms, and I couldn't from where I was, I couldn't necessarily see, again, it was dark, I couldn't see how far down its arms went, but it looked to me like they were long enough that if it wanted to, it could have reached right out to my window. And like I said, that was, from my estimation, a good 5 feet away. So, I don't know if maybe they weren't quite as long as I thought they were, but they definitely seemed to be longer than any animal or anything that I've seen walking upright, which was another part that scared the heck out of me.
Now, I can understand that. Matt, do you ever look at Tim and wonder if he's handling his encounter as well as it might seem he is?
Tim is, he's a pretty stoic guy. This kind of happened in a point in his life where he was young. He was telling me how he turned over and started praying, and it seemed like his prayer was answered because the thing went away. He never had another encounter again. So it seems like he adjusted with it due to his faith, obviously never seeing it again. And to me, it seems like he's dealing with it pretty well. I know you've heard people who can't even finish a description before getting shaky or even, going into tears.
Oh, sure. There have been plenty of those. As you've been talking about the freakishly long arms, Tim, and what you just mentioned about the situation with eyewitnesses having a hard time telling me about their experiences, this one poor woman comes to mind who unfortunately saw one, I believe, at pretty close range. I don't really know for sure how close she was to it because she was unable to finish the conversation, but I felt so horrible for her. She was more disturbed by how freakishly long its arms were than by anything else. She kept on saying it was a werewolf, it was a werewolf. And of all the eyewitnesses I've spoken with, I'd probably have to say that she was probably the one I was the most convinced and concerned about putting a gun into her mouth and pulling the trigger. She was that distraught. I just felt so sorry for her. Yeah, she was just totally unconsolable. There are times when eyewitnesses contact you, and no matter what you say, no matter what you do, they just are not going to be able to handle it well. So, yeah, it just goes along with what I do that from time to time, you'll talk with people like that who are in a really bad place.
We live in a society where, from an early age, we're brought up with a zoology section in our brain and a fantasy section. This exists, this doesn't exist. This exists, this doesn't exist. And I can imagine, for somebody who's pretty, straight-laced in their beliefs and pretty sure of their concept of the world around them, seeing something that they don't believe can exist, but it's there in front of them. And then now they have to come to terms with everything else, fantasy and reality becoming blurred. And that's a lot to put on somebody.
Oh, that is. Yeah, it's easy to lose sight of the fact that if you see a dogman, then that does force the issue. If dogmen are real, what else is out there? That's a real tough pill to swallow. I realize, Tim, it's been 20 years since that experience happened, but do you remember any problem with pets going missing in that neighborhood back then?
At the time, I was only concerned about really my own pets, but occasionally you'd hear animals, cats especially. A lot of people at the time had cats that I guess they're kind of like outside cats. They'd not necessarily feral. They would just go explore at night and then come home. We had some cats like that. Every now and again you'd hear just like a ear-splitting scream. Not the same kind of cry an animal makes when it's fighting, but more kind of the sound they make when they're dying. And you'd hear that every once in a while, but again, at the time, I really didn't think too much of it because as far as any kind of information about, what this thing was, dogmen, anything like that, there really wasn't much at the time. Plus, like I said, I didn't talk to anyone about it for over 20 years, so it's not like I went looking for the information. But, yeah, I mean, it happened. I don't know if there was like a spike in animal deaths at the time. This was late 80s, early 90s, so it's not like you could just look something up on the internet if you were interested at the time.
That's a good point. The next morning after that encounter, did you go out to look for evidence?
No, I did not. As a matter of fact, I stayed away from that particular area for probably a couple weeks afterwards. You know, if we were playing ball or something in the front yard and the ball went down that way, I didn't go get it. My brothers probably looked at me weird for a little while, but after a while, when I was willing to go back into that area, probably enough time had passed that there wasn't really any evidence.
I can't say I blame you for avoiding that area. From what I understand, your parents just bought a house in a heavily wooded area on top of a mountain in Utah. What are your feelings about that?
Well, it is a heavily wooded area, but I've been up there with them several times, and it seems like a pretty good area. So I'm hoping my luck continues, and I nor my family will have any run-ins in the future.
Yeah, well, that makes two of us. I hope you never have another encounter, too. Have there been times in your life after that experience where you got the impression another dogman might have been around, though?
Thankfully not. I've never had any times where I've thought or even hinted at that. I mean, it seems like there was definitely a feeling I had when I saw it. And like I said, when I woke up, I had that feeling of unease. So I don't know if that's associated with them at all or not, but I've never had a feeling like that before or since. So I like to think that's a good indicator that there haven't been any close to me.
Yeah, that feeling you mentioned is pretty common. You seem to be handling it really well. You mentioned the fact that even at your parents' house in the woods in Utah, you still can function and do things without much trouble, but have you had trouble doing other things like taking the trash out at night or anything like that?
No, not, like I said, if I had any trouble, it would have been in that probably about 2-week period afterwards where I wouldn't go anywhere near that area. I don't know, I guess at the time, since I didn't really know anything about dogmen, I kind of equated it with that area, so I figured as long as I stayed away from that area, I was safe. But since then, like I said, I haven't really had any trouble taking trash out, going places at night. I mean, it wasn't too long after that, a few years, when I was about 15-ish, I went on a trip to Yellowstone with some scout buddies of mine, and that was all in the backwoods. But at the time, I was more worried about bears, so I didn't really think of my dogman experience.
That trip to Yellowstone sounds like a great time.
It was. We did some canoeing in the backcountry across like 3 lakes. There were some parts where it's shallow, so you have to carry the canoes. But I was short, and sometimes there'd be like a hole, so I'd fall in the hole. So eventually I just got to slog through while the rest of them carried the canoes.
Yeah, that does sound like a good time. Matt, you're a geology major. You're very curious about the biological origins of dogmen. Please tell us about that.
Well, like I said, I loved taking geology classes. I actually went to Cal State Northridge. I had a very, very brilliant professor. He liked me so much that as a freshman, he put me into one of his advanced classes. We talked very heavily about evolution, different evolutionary theories, cladistics versus punctuated equilibrium versus just straight up, the Darwin, survival of the fittest. And I couldn't help but bring some of that to the table when I was thinking about how does something like this exist? How does a wolf evolve to become bipedal, or is it an ape that evolved dog-like characteristics, or is it just some weird mutation? I even went so far as to do a little bit of research on my own about some of the Navajo stories of skinwalkers, how native cultures, they believe these actually are people that transform. I couldn't think of an explanation as to how something like this would exist, because evolution is all about how something comes about to fill a niche. And whatever the heck niche this is, I don't want to be whatever food source the dogman goes after.
Yeah, that is a pretty scary niche.
I'm just thinking, as evolution taking, one of nature's most perfect predators, a wolf, and making it bigger and more terrifying.
Not to mention a bit malicious.
Yeah. The dogman doesn't harass people. I mean, it does. But if it wanted you dead, you'd be dead. It might, a large majority of the encounters I heard about, read about, listened to is, people were like, this thing could have got me whenever it wanted to. It was more just trying to scare me either back inside, away from its territory, or just wanted to scare me for, its own amusement. But at any point, if this thing actually wanted to hunt me down, I would be dead. It was a very common, reoccurring threat I heard. So maybe it just wants to be left alone. But, then there's also stories about weird disappearances where, you find bodies up in trees. What was that? I think the beast between two lakes, that whole story, and bears don't take their kills into trees. So that's just also kind of terrifying. I would not want to be on the receiving end of any of this. And it's even more terrifying when you listen to Tim's story, but, you could be out walking your dog down this well-lit street, at dusk in a urban area and still see one. That's unsettling.
What's even more unnerving than that is you can be walking your dog down a well-lit street during the daytime and run into one. That's been done before.
I'm glad with my experience I actually had 4 walls and a window between me and it. I would not have wanted to see it in the open at all.
Yeah, by you having the wall between you and it, that definitely does help. It sure does make your heart go out to people who are within grabbing distance. You really have to feel for those people.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that's not a good situation. Well, before I ask you two for your closing comments and we get out of here, I wanted to bring something to the listeners' attention. You two have a podcast. Please tell us about it.
I started a podcast. It's very low tech. Just me and my laptop. Sort of a therapy exercise I was doing for reasons I will not get into at the moment. But it's called Doc Hardtree versus the World. And pretty much what I do is my friends and I, or sometimes just myself, we go on and we rant or talk or explain certain subjects. And anything from paranormal encounters to movie reviews, political mumbo-jumbo, stuff like that. So it's a very eclectic series. It's slowly coming up there in the subscription. So I don't want to do shameless self-plugging here, but if you let me, I totally will.
Oh, no, please do.
Yeah, just Doc Hardtree, D-O-C, and then Hardtree, H-A-R-D-T-R-E-E, versus, I think just the uppercase V-S, The World. That my YouTube channel should come up, with just a rudimentary search like that.
Your show sounds really promising to me, Matt, but one concern I do have is I think you need to use more discerning taste on the people you invite on your show. I mean, after all, you invited me to come on.
No, I think we've had a few quality people.
I'm greatly honored at the, you entertained the notion of coming on my show, Vic. I do appreciate that, all kidding aside.
Oh, no, I'm glad to do it. Anytime I can help, just let me know. Well, guys, it's about time to get out of here. Before we do, Tim, do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Not too much. I mean, on the one hand, I'm kind of glad to learn about you and your show and everything because it's kind of...
That's not the Dogman, it's the Lord St. Bernard.
But it's kind of some validation because it's always been something in the back of my head where it's like, I know I saw it, but at the same time, kind of like we were talking about earlier, like the first thing you want to do is try and explain it away. It's been there in the back of my head, kind of churning. So on the one hand, I'm glad. On the other hand, I'm not so glad because that means, as far as I knew, there was only one of these things.
Yeah, it would be nice if you only had one to worry about. So
yeah, I guess that's kind of my closing comment is that I'm glad to have more information. At the same time, it's a little scarier than I thought it was now, but not that much. Thankfully, I haven't had one of those encounters where I was out in the open right next to it, because if I had, I'd probably be much more traumatized.
Oh, I'm sure you would. Matt, how about you? Do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
Well, to anyone out there who might be listening as a skeptic, and I used to be one of them, no matter what your friends or colleagues say to you, if it sounds like they're opening up about something. You know, it's not just like you're in a bar or a pub coming up with weird stories to one-up each other. If somebody actually tells you something that might seem outlandish, save your laughter for yourself for later. Don't do it in front of them, because they could be coming at you from a therapeutic perspective. They could be coming at you because they think you wouldn't mock them. They could just be getting something off their chest that's been sitting there for 20 years. So no matter how outrageous something sounds, give it the benefit of the doubt. You might be the first person in years that person's opened up to. And if you mock them, they will never open up to anybody else again. And I think Tim's a pretty well-adjusted person. I don't think if I had mocked him, it would have stunted our friendship to a certain extent. But let's say somebody out there has a more aggressive encounter and they open up. The last thing they want to hear is someone calling them a liar in a roundabout way. So just, if somebody says something to you, regarding anything paranormal or whatever, listen. That could just be all they wanted.
Very well done and very well said, guys. I really do appreciate your time. Thanks so much for coming on.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
It's been great having you. Have a great night.
You too.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye. Hi everyone, thanks for listening to another episode of Dogman Encounters Radio. I'm Vic Cundiff and I'll be your host for the show. If you've had an encounter of your own and would like to speak with me whether in private or on the show, please go to dogmanencounters.com and submit a report. I'd love to hear from you. Tonight's guest is Sarah. Sarah, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me on your show.
Thanks for being here. Sarah, please give us a brief bio on yourself.
I recently graduated from high school and I am working on becoming a nursing graduate now. I am part of a paranormal research group that is named Ghost Quest. Other than that, there's not much.
So you're a member of a paranormal research group. Please tell us more about that.
We founded our paranormal research group about a year and a half ago. We have done quite a few investigations here in my hometown, such as Fort King, the actual fort, as well as a couple other investigations.
Is there much activity in your town?
I would like to think there's activity everywhere you go. It can't be gauged by more or less depending upon town. It just depends on what the spirits want to step forward and show you.
Yeah, I'll bet you're right. I'm sure there are a lot more encounters with spirits and things like that than what we're ever going to know because of all the people who have those experiences and never come forward and talk about them. Sarah, what bothers you most about having your dogman encounter?
The fact that I had the encounter and didn't know what it was to begin with was probably the thing that bothered me most. I was uninformed on the subject, and it led it to be a little bit scary.
Oh, I'm sure it was. When you see something like that all your life you've been told doesn't exist, how are you supposed to handle something like that?
I'm not sure. I suppose you're supposed to just kind of take it in stride and learn as much as you can about it, and so you can be aware for the next time you experience this.
Yeah, that's about all you can do. There are so many things that come along with having a dogman encounter that most people sitting listening to the show who have never had one themselves will never understand or know. Having said that, how do you find out about the show?
My uncle listens to your show. He's a firm believer in Bigfoot, and while looking through some Bigfoot things, he stumbled upon the Dogman, and that led him to your show.
I'm so glad he knew about it. Because of you having that encounter, if you hadn't known about the show, I'm not sure how much help I've been able to offer you, but I'd like to think that it's at least been somewhat helpful having the conversations that we've had.
It has been really helpful being able to learn more about the Dogman so that I don't feel as afraid of it and what I saw. It helped me a lot.
Well, that's really good news. That's why I'm doing this in the first place. The more you know about anything, the more comfortable you're going to feel about it. So that's only to be expected. Before you had that encounter, did you like being outside at night?
Not particularly. I was never really too fond of being outside at night.
If you weren't all that fond of it before you had that encounter, I can only imagine how you feel now.
I don't like to be outside at night. The Dogman encounter just kind of reassured the fact that I don't want to be outside at night.
It's not surprising that you would feel that way. Do you live in a rural setting or more of an urban one now?
I live in more of a rural setting. Lots of farmland and forest around me.
No, that definitely can't help things. Please tell us about the Greenway Trails and your connection to them.
The Greenway Trails are a big reserve of land set aside in Florida, and now it's become more of an animal reserve. There's coyotes on it, and deer, lots of bunnies, and small animals and such. We actually even have red squirrels in the Greenways, so there's a lot of animals that live and roam in the Greenway Trails.
How big is that Greenway Trail Reserve?
I know that it cuts all the way through Florida. I'm not sure how far down, but I know it goes down to the Everglades at one point.
Yeah, sounds pretty big. Is it almost all swamps, or is part of it dry?
There are some swamps. We're actually closer to a part of the swamp, but a lot of it's dry as well.
Because of having that experience with the Dogman, how close have you come to moving out of there, just so you could get away from an area where there might be one up close and personal without you knowing it?
I actually haven't thought about leaving my house at all. I feel very safe here, and if they are close by, I feel like we respect each other enough to not invade each other's territory of sorts.
Well, I can appreciate those feelings, but do understand that it seems like in some cases they'll go miles out of their way to seek out an encounter. I don't know why, but they do.
I feel like the encounter I had, maybe it just wanted to be seen. Maybe they're looking for someone to notice them, like you have.
They do seem to have a way of doing that. All right, Sarah, let's get into this encounter of yours. On August 24th, you were driving home from work at 1 a.m. when you saw something you never expected to see. Please tell us about that experience. Give us every last detail that comes to mind.
I was driving home, and it'd gotten pretty late, so no one else was on the road, and I saw this thing crouching in the road on the right side of the road. I was in the left lane, it was in the right lane. I was really confused, so I started slowing down. I almost actually stopped my car. At one point, when I got close enough to see what it was, I actually did stop my car. And it stood up on its back legs, and it was like something I'd never seen before. It watched me, and I watched it, and it had these red eyes that just kind of pierced your everything. It just watched, and I watched, and then it started walking across the road on its hind legs. I thought someone was playing some kind of prank on me. It just couldn't seem real to me. It just wasn't real. When it finally got to the right lane, it stopped and it just stared at me, and I stared at it, and then it like snarled. It showed its teeth, and it was really scary. It wasn't like it wanted to jump in the car and hurt me, but it was making sure I knew that it was there and that it wasn't going to mess around if I tried anything. It was kind of warning me, I guess. It was really scary. And I wish I would have taken a picture. It just seemed unreal. I thought it must have been someone in a suit pranking me. This must have been fake. Someone's pranking me. But the more I looked at it, the more I realized it couldn't have been a prank. There's no way someone could get their legs to bend the way that it was. There's no one that's that lanky and tall. It was real, and I didn't know what to do. Finally, I just decided I needed to get away from it, so I went into the next lane, and I took off as fast as I could. I kept checking in the mirrors behind me to make sure it wasn't following me. I just drove as fast as I could to get home. And as soon as I got home, I went inside. I practically ran into the door, and I locked them, and I went straight to bed, hoping that, maybe in the morning I'd forget about this, that it was some kind of nightmare.
How much sleep did you get that night?
Not much. I kept thinking about it, so I didn't know what to do. I just kind of kept thinking about it, and it was kind of hard to get to sleep.
Oh, I'm sure it was. Sleep had to be hard to come by. When you have an experience like that, you're naturally going to lay in bed that night and just run it over and over again in your head, trying to make sense of it. When you did first see it, was it on its back legs or down on all fours?
It was kind of down on all fours, hunched down on the ground. It was more dog-looking when I first saw it. It was hunched over on all fours.
You said it was more dog-looking when you first saw it. How would you describe its shoulder structure? Was it more human-like or more dog-like?
When I first saw it, I was so far away that I didn't think that it looked like a dog in the road at first. But once it stood up, it had these broad-ish shoulders, and its arms kind of just hung by its sides. It was really lanky. I would say when it was kneeled down like it looked more like a dog to me from behind. I would put it doggish, but when it was facing me and, looking at me, its shoulders were more human.
Yeah, that had to be awfully freaky to see. When you saw it stand up like that onto its two back legs, was it a smooth transition?
I would think so, yes. It kind of pushed itself up. It used one of its front paws to kind of push itself into a standing position. But once it was standing, it was standing.
Oh, I see. When this is all going on, were your windows up or were they down?
No, my windows were up. I'm very glad I had them up.
Oh, I'm sure you were awfully glad they were up, because, if they had been down, You would have really felt exposed, to say the least. How far were you when this happened to the closest house?
To the closest house, I was pretty far. I would say that the first house to be closest to me would be at least a mile away.
Yeah, that's pretty far. After having an experience like this and seeing one, how dangerous do you think they are?
I think if they want to be dangerous, they can and will be dangerous. I feel that if left alone, it wouldn't bother me unless it felt the need to.
Because you had that encounter, how likely are you to be willing to go out in the woods again after dark?
By myself, not very likely at all. I don't see myself wandering into the woods myself after this.
Let's talk about the recovery process. After you had that experience, did you do anything special to try and help yourself deal with it and rebound and get back to a point where you could function the way you wanted to function in life?
For a little while, I didn't really talk about it. I brought it up to my mom a few days after it happened, and I felt like talking about it would have helped. She thought that it was a demon or something, and so she told me it was normal, that we should just, leave it alone. It'll leave us alone. It won't bother us. So I decided I was going to try and talk to someone else about it, and that's when I talked to my uncle, and he told me about your show. After listening to your show a bit, I felt a little bit better about the whole experience, knowing that I wasn't going crazy, that there was actually something out there.
Oh, I'm sure you did feel better. Like I've said before, misery does love company. When people who have these experiences find out that it's not just them who's fighting through having to deal with the knowledge of knowing that these things are out there, it almost always is a huge help. At its closest point, how far were you from it?
Maybe 50 feet, give or take a little bit. It was relatively close to my car.
Yeah, 50 feet might seem like it's a pretty good distance, but when you see something like that, it might as well be right on top of you. When all this was going on, did it ever do anything that led you to believe it might be ready to approach you?
I don't think it was going to approach me, no.
Well, that's good. There are two different kinds of encounters. You've got the encounters where dogmen don't seem to be all that intent on approaching you or don't even seem to be focusing on you. You've got the other kind, which are much worse in almost every case, where the dogman is focused on you and it almost seems like nothing else in the universe matters to it. I'm so glad that you had the first kind that wasn't all that threatening compared to the second option.
Well, I definitely know that it knew I was there. We made eye contact. It knew I was there. It saw me. And I saw it, but I didn't feel as if it was going to approach my car any closer than it already was.
Yeah, thank goodness it didn't. Just a bit ago, you talked about its shoulders, but as far as the arms would go, what did they look like?
The arms of the dogman that I saw were very lanky, like long arms. It didn't seem like its arms fit to its body. They were longer than a human's would be to their body. It was definitely noticeable that it was a strong animal. It was definitely muscular of sorts. It wasn't thin, but it wasn't like fat either. It was husky. It was lanky and husky.
If its arms were that long when it was down on all fours when you first saw it, what kind of profile did its back have?
It was sloping. It would definitely be sloping.
Did it have a strange way of moving, or did it seem kind of fluid in its motion?
I would say it was fluid. It definitely knew what it was doing and how it was going to do what it was doing.
When this was all going on and you were studying it, I'm sure you never took your eyes off of it. What physical feature that it had upset you the most?
Its eyes. Its eyes were one of the scariest features. it's like it looked into you.
Yeah, I can understand that. I've heard that plenty of times before. Did you ever get a chance to see its teeth, or did it keep its mouth shut the whole time?
No, I saw its teeth. Its teeth were long and canine-like, and they had a yellowish tint. It was really scary to see.
Oh, I'm sure it was. When its mouth was closed, though, could you still see the teeth?
I don't remember. I just remember when it was, like, snarling at me. That's when I remember seeing the teeth.
That's all right. You had a lot of things going through that head of yours at the time, so no one can fault you for that. It's funny how different people look at their encounters in so many different ways. Some people think it's a matter of luck to see one. They're so glad they had their encounters. Not many people will feel that way, but there are some who do feel that way. You've got the majority of eyewitnesses who think it's a curse that they did have an encounter. Where do you fall in that group? Do you think it was a good thing that you had this encounter, or do you almost feel cursed?
I don't feel like it was a good thing, but I don't feel like I was cursed either. I feel like I learned more about this creature because it showed itself to me, and because of that, I can move forward.
Well, understand, there are ways you can look at this in a positive light. There are ways you can look at it in a negative one. You do have an advantage now. You do know that they are in fact out there. Other people who've never had an encounter, they don't have that knowledge. So, when you take the good with the bad, at least you do have something good that did come out of this that you can point to and think about. If there is such a thing as a good thing to take away from a dogman encounter. Looking back on that experience, is there anything you wish you could have or would have done differently?
I wish I would have taken a picture. I feel like had I taken the picture, it would have been easier to show my family and my friends to help them experience what I had seen.
Would you have had time to dig your phone or a camera out of your purse, get it ready, and snap a photo of that dogman before it was out of sight?
I don't think I would have been able to take a picture of it. I think it would have definitely either left or who knows what else could have happened before I was able to take that picture.
You're probably right. It goes without saying, too, that you were in fact in an impaired state.
Yes, it would have been really hard, I think, to actually get a good, clear picture of it.
It doesn't help either the fact that it was so late at night. That just makes it even harder to do something like that. How would you describe its fur?
It had a gray-brown color to it, like a red, gray-brown. It definitely fit into what the coyotes look like around here.
Do you have a big population of coyotes in that area, I take it?
Yes, we do.
Yeah, it's not always the case, but in areas where you do have high populations of coyotes, that's where a lot of encounters seem to be reported. I don't really know how it's connected, but it seems like it is in some way. Well, Sarah, it's about time for us to get out of here. Do you have any closing comments you'd like to share?
No. Thank you again for having me on your show.
Oh, you know you're welcome. Thanks again so much and have a great night.
You too.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.